Well, hey, we are diving into a conversation, not specifically about kids, but the people who raise them this morning. This is part 2 of a series of conversations that we're in called The Rents. And I want to kick off by telling you about a moment that I experienced, not as a dad, but actually kind of experiencing someone else's kid a few months ago. So I was sitting at Caribou Coffee a few months ago, and one of my favorite things to do, I don't know why this is, but I just love any chance that I get to overhear an interview. Anybody else like that? Like if you're out at a coffee shop and you just hear someone interviewing for a job, your ear just perks up just a little bit more? Just me. Okay, great. Awesome. I just find it curious. I've interviewed a lot of people over the years. I've interviewed myself. I'm always just curious, like what's going to come out in these kind of moments. And so there's a teenager, probably about 17 years old, who's there interviewing for a job at Caribou Coffee. So, great place. So they're having the interview, and the interviewer's like asking him different questions about his schedule and all the things. And then the interviewer asks him a question and she says, hey, who has been the most impactful person in your life? Like, who's somebody who you just like look up to and they've kind of just left the greatest impact or impression on you? And he thought about it for a second, and then he kind of looked back at her and he goes, this is going to sound kind of cliche. He goes, but I'd have to say my dad. And then he spent the next 2 minutes just talking about the way that his dad has sacrificed for him, the way that his dad has gone out of his way for him, and the impression that his dad has made on him. And I sat back for a second and I thought, first off, man, like that doesn't sound cliche at all. That sounds like a great answer. And secondly, I thought, and I tried to wait till the end of the interview and then I had to go, but I almost wanted to catch him on the way out the door and ask, have you ever told your dad that? Because as a dad myself, I'd tell you, like, if I could have my kid say one thing about me when she's 17 or 18 years old, man, I would just do anything for her to say those words. Now, if you're a parent, you know this and you feel the weight of this so many times, right? We get a short window of time to influence our kids. But the way that we influence them for that season undoubtedly will impact them for the rest of their life. And for many of us, right, we get a season like that, and then we almost wait until the day that they turn 18, the day that they graduate and go off to college, the day that they move out into an apartment with friends, the day that they just find themselves as an adult, and wonder, man, what are they going to look like in that moment, and what will the impact have been that I had on them? Now, as kids get older, we have these moments, right, where we start to get glimpses of our kids, right? I'll tell you, my parents got a glimpse of that when I was 18 years old. I was 18 years old and actually graduating high school. I just graduated high school. And we hit that spot of like the thing that comes in every family's life at some point, the graduation party, which is just like almost bigger than a wedding at this point. You know, it's just like you just kind of go all out and celebrate the fact that the kid has finished high school and is moving into a next chapter of his or her life. And so in our house too, like there were naturally things that like my parents were trying to get done around the house. They were putting in a patio just for this party, which I thought was crazy, you know what I mean? But they're doing all kinds of things. In fact, my mom was doing everything she could to prepare for this party to the point that she actually was supposed to go on like a missions trip to Peru, like a couple weeks before my graduation party. And she came to me and said, hey, how about you take my spot on the missions trip so that I can stay home and get ready for your graduation party? Which I was like, that's just a wild choice, but sure, I'm not going to say no to that. So we went to Peru. My mom's still prepping for the party. There were moments in Peru where I actually wondered if I was going to make it back for the party, you know, but lo and behold, we finally made it back for the party. And we get there, and we're at the party, and we're having a great time, and people are just kind of saying nice things and celebrating things. It's the kind of moment where, like, even no matter what the kid has been through that season of life, you just kind of elevate and celebrate the kid in that season. And my parents, I'd say my dad was a pastor, so we grew up in church. They were just like so intentional and such great parents. I mean, it's kind of like the ideal like trophy parents. If you could ever choose parents like them, you'd want to choose parents like that. And so we're sitting around and we're talking about things that had happened, and people are just saying nice things and bringing gifts or what have you. And then all of a sudden at some point, somebody begins to circulate a picture, like a printed photograph around the circle at this graduation party. And the picture makes its way to me, and everybody's kind of been laughing all the way through it, and the picture makes its way to me, and it makes its way to my parents. And I look at the picture, and they look at the picture, and it's a picture of me from earlier that year, sitting in the basement of the church that my dad pastored, with a few of my friends at a table in the church kitchen, with the leftover communion elements sitting in front of us, having shot races with the leftover communion cups that hadn't been drank. And my parents, quite honestly, who in the eyes of many people, even myself, were the ideal perfect parents, realized in that moment something that every parent recognizes at some point in their life, that you can do everything right if you're a kid and still not be enough for them. Now, you've probably felt this in a variety of ways. I doubt your kid is doing shot races with communion cups, right? But you've experienced this in so many ways, moments where you felt like you were doing everything you possibly could, and yet everything you did still wasn't enough for what they needed from you. Some of us feel this in sports. When my daughter was 4 years old, she was starting to play soccer for the first time. And I cared about this because it was her first sports experience, and I didn't have great sports experiences growing up as a kid. And I just wanted her to have a great first experience. And like every youth soccer league, right, the youth soccer league starts sending out those emails about how they desperately need coaches in that season, right? They're like, we need a coach for your team. We really need a coach for your team. And then they just start threatening. They're like, if no one volunteers, we're going to cancel your team. If no one volunteers, we're going to cancel your team. And I actually got concerned at that moment. Not that they were going to cancel the team. I just got concerned at who might sign up to coach at that point. And I was like, you know what? I don't know a thing about soccer. But at this point, I'm actually just going to step in because I know something about kids, or at least my kid. And honestly, I wasn't worried about the other kids. I just wanted my kid to have a great first experience. Well, I got there, and we went 0-8 on the season. The best pictures I have from this experience are like the kids in the goal, just in the middle of practice, like fish in a net. I mean, it just went disastrous. And like I had like studied every playbook. I had tried to learn every drill. We were turning drills into other drills just to like try to make them work. And none of it seemed to work. I felt like I was trying to do everything I possibly could, and yet it still wasn't enough for my kid in that moment. Some of you have felt that with sports as they got older. You found yourself going, hey, I feel like they probably need better equipment. So you went and you researched and you found the best equipment for them. And then they showed up at practice only to find out that there was still better equipment that you could have, or maybe felt like you should have gotten for them. Some of you have felt this with homework. Your kid came home with math, and you were good at math, but now math is not, like it's totally different math at this point. And so now you're trying to relearn math, and some of you spent hours on YouTube trying to learn how to do math or trying to relearn subjects that you almost forgot from years ago, only to find out that you still weren't what your kid needed you to be in that moment. Some of us feel that with our kids' social skills and their ability to connect and make friends. I mean, you just want your kid to have good friends, and you've done everything you can to pour into them, and yet you still look and you still feel like you haven't given them enough to walk into the first day of school, or to walk into daycare, or to walk in the next chapter of their life and be able to connect in the ways that you would hope for them to be able to connect. We feel this all the time. Feel like we give everything we possibly can. Feel like we're doing everything right, or at least everything that we know to do right. Yet still would not be enough. And there's a word for this. Honestly, it's a word that I think is an incredibly common parenting emotion. In fact, parents in the room, all of us have probably felt this at some point this week. The word is inadequate, right? Like no matter what you do, you could never be what your kids need you to be. You're not enough. Now, we feel this in so many different spaces as parents, right? But there's one space in particular that I want to talk about this morning. That's a space that I hear, especially in rooms like this, I hear from parents over and over and over again, feeling like they themselves are inadequate, that they don't have what their kids need them to give. And I specifically hear this often when it comes to our faith. Parents feeling like they don't have what it takes to give their kids the faith that they hope that their kid might one day have. I mean, many of us have the desire to pass on what we believe, what we put our trust and our hope in, what gives us hope in the midst of our world. Many of us desire to pass that on, and yet we feel like we don't have what it takes to pass it on. And even last week, we kicked off our series by talking about the most important thing that we could give our kids. We said the most important thing that we could give our kids is not a lesson that we teach them, but actually a person to follow, a person that we introduce them to, specifically the person of Jesus. In a world that constantly finds itself seeking hope, we constantly, as parents, find ourselves looking to give hope, and we feel pressure after pressure after pressure to give them that. And yet, I find over and over again that a lot of us lack the confidence in our ability to pass on our faith to the next generation of our families. And in fact, a lot of us feel inadequate and even comparatively inadequate in this. I have a friend who I was spending time with a few years ago, and he would talk about the things that they were doing as a family in their house when it came to the area of faith. The way that they would like spend bedtime and read Bible stories and sing together and pray together and all these things. And he would talk about this, and like, I'm a pastor, you know? And I would hear him talk, and I'm like, man, it feels like you're having like a church service in your living room every night, you know? And I felt just massively inadequate, or like I wasn't doing enough in that moment. So many of us feel that way. Many of us feel that largely because we lack a couple of things. First off, we feel like we lack time for this. I mean, by the time you're done with school, band, rehearsals, taking your kids to practices, just getting groceries and maybe doing your job. Many of us feel like we don't have the time for the big conversations, the most important conversations that we would hope to have with our kids. We feel that in our house. I mean, even in our house, there are so many days where we're wrapping up the day and we're scrambling to get our kid just to bed, not even on time, just not later than it's already going to be, you know? And we just find ourselves going, do we have time for that? We just have moments where we go, we're going to skip some of the things in our own bedtime routine, some of the conversations that we typically have on a regular basis because of the pace of the day and the lack of time that we feel like we have in that moment. Some of us feel like we don't have the time for the conversations that we hope to have. Other of us, if it's not time, we feel like we just don't have a plan. Like even if you had the time for it, you're not sure what you would do in those moments and what you would say and how you would approach and engage those kinds of conversations. Now, quite honestly, this feeling of inadequacy, or this feeling of not being quite ready, or not giving our kids everything they need, or not being sure or confident or certain if we're going to be able to pass on the most important things to them. That feeling is really not just a condition or a thing that we feel today. It's been a condition of humanity for thousands of years. In fact, 3,500 years ago, about 3,000 years ago, there was a father figure himself and also a leader of a group of people who felt like he needed to pass on his faith and make sure that his faith was passed on to each generation of his people. It's a man that some of you are familiar with, a man by the name of Moses. Many of us are familiar with Moses. If you've ever watched The Prince of Egypt, if you remember that movie, Moses who showed up to a pharaoh in Egypt thousands of years ago in front of him and talked to him about a group of Hebrew slaves who were his people, who he wanted to be released from slavery in the moment. If you ever heard, there was, let my people go, you know? Moses in that moment. Eventually Moses led the Hebrew people, thousands of people, out of slavery across the Red Sea and into the wilderness, into this dry, arid area of land where they would wander themselves for about 40 years, so long that most of the people who left Egypt had passed on by that moment. And Moses was hitting the end of his life. And the people, the Hebrew people, were about to actually step into the land that God had promised them, this land that they were supposed to make their own and settle themselves within. But Moses knew that he wouldn't be able to go into that land himself. And so near the very end of his life, Moses took some time to gather the Hebrew people before him, to all gather around him, kind of like a grandfather, pulling together his family for what might be the last family conversation. He pulls them around, and he starts to instill his wisdom, things that he's been saying for most of their lives, but things that he wants to make sure that they don't lose or forget. And he's pouring all of this into them. He's talking to them about the way that God has protected them. He's talking to them about the things that God has promised them. He's talking to them about the ways that God had instructed them to live, the principles, the rules, the laws that they had been given to live by. And he reminds them of all of this. But then, closer to the end of that conversation, he recognizes that this doesn't matter just with this generation. This won't continue if only this generation gets it. And he recognizes the importance to his family and to his people of continuing to pass on their faith, continuing to pass on the ways that they'd been taught to live to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. And so, in the final days of his life, he lays out for them a plan for how to pass that on. And it's the kind of plan that actually doesn't require more time. It just requires some more intentionality. Look at what Moses says to them. He starts with saying this. He says, "Listen, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone." So he reminds them, hey, nothing and no one else guides us season after season chapter after chapter. No one else is in complete control of our world, and everyone and everything else is subject to him. And then he makes a turn. He talks about their God, but he talks about their God in a way that no other culture talked about their gods. In fact, every other culture would talk about their gods in this time period as primarily desiring or needing or being driven by sacrifices, physical, tangible sacrifices. And Moses talks about their God as if he wants something more and even greater than that. He says, you must love the Lord your God. He says, the greatest thing your God would want from you is not just your stuff, not just a sacrifice, but your heart, your love. He says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all of your strength, with every part of you. And you must commit yourselves wholeheartedly to these commands that I am giving you today. In other words, hey, I'm going to give you some commands. I've given you some commands to live by, some rules to kind of align your life to. He goes, you could just go through the motions of these things, but these aren't the kinds of things worth doing half-heartedly. These are the kinds of things worth throwing the fullness of yourself, all of yourself, your emotions, your mind, every bit of you into. In other words, hey, don't just use them when it's convenient to you. Don't just talk about them when you're trying to make a point. No, this is the kind of thing to throw all of you into. This is the kind of thing to build the heart of your family around. And then he begins to give them the plan. And it's not a complex plan. It's actually a pretty simple plan. Look at what he says. He says, repeat them, these things that I've commanded you, these issues, these laws, these commands of faith. Repeat them again and again to your children. Say it over and over and over again. The Hebrew word here also implies kind of the idea of like making an impression in your children. Now, I was thinking about this week. I sleep every night on a like a memory foam pillow. Anybody else use like a nice memory foam neck support pillow? I'm the only person getting older in this room. Okay, that's great. No. Yeah, I sleep with this pillow. It's this foam pillow, right? And every time I get about one a year because I buy the cheap ones for like $11 at IKEA, so I have to replace it about every year. But once a year, I buy a new one. And when I bring it home, I lay on it for the first time, and it feels like the neck is like so high. You know what I mean? It's like my head is like halfway to the ceiling is what it feels like in that moment. And the next night I lay on it again, it feels the exact same way. And the next night I lay on it again, and it feels the exact same way. But over the course of a year, slowly but surely, that pillow begins to conform to my neck. Day after day, night after night, time after time again, I begin to leave an impression. And that pillow, raising kids feels a lot like that. Anybody feel like you say the same thing every single day, over and over and over again? Moses goes, that's not wrong. That's normal. That's how we leave a mark. That's how you make an impression. He says the things that we've talked about, hey, he goes, talk about them over and over and over again. He says, talk about them when you're at home. You mean when I'm trying to rush to get dinner on the table or just convince my 6-year-old to eat her dinner, in less than an hour? You mean when we're scrambling to get homework done in time to get to bed? You mean when I'm like arguing with my kid about whether or not she should brush her teeth faster than 13 seconds? Or when I'm like she's coming out to go potty for the third time that night, in an hour time span, doing everything she can to stay awake. You mean those moments? Because for so many of us, that's what at home feels like. Yeah. Because talk about when you're at home and when you're on the road. I'm shuttling her to school, to practice, to rehearsals, to everything in between. Yeah. Now, I thought about this week. I was kind of processing for this conversation. And I thought about it. I was like, well, you know what? When Moses was talking to these people, they walked everywhere they went, So it's like they spent a lot of time on the road. So it's like, I don't know if that really applies to me. I don't really have that much time on the road. And then I did the math. This was scary. I did the math to see on an average, like just normal week, how much time my daughter spends in the car with at least one, if not both of her parents. You know what the number was? 6 hours. 6 hours. That's almost a full school day that she spends in the car with at least one, if not both, of her parents. I went, man, we do spend a lot of time on the road. You might want to do the math this week. You might be surprised what that number is for you. He says, hey, talk about these things as you go from here to there, to there, to the next place. And then he goes on, he says, when you're going to bed, I don't know how long bedtime takes at your house, but it might be longer than 6 hours at my house. Yeah. He says, yeah, as you're putting your kid to bed, talk about it then. He says, and when you're getting up, talk about it then. I'll be honest with you, I was challenged by that this week. The when you're getting up piece in my house often feels like just chaos. It's like scrambling to board a flight that's like 2 hours delayed, and they're trying just to get everybody on the plane, and they're like, last call, if you don't board now, we're leaving you. Like that's what leaving the house and getting up and going feels like for us in the morning. But I was thinking about this week. I was thinking about my parents somehow every morning growing up. Before we would rush out to school, would sit us down and they would open up Scripture and they would read a chapter of Scripture to us. They would have a conversation with us, and then they would pray for us before we went out to school. And quite honestly, I'm challenged by that because I'm not even sure how to do that. And I grew up in that. And then Moses goes on. He says, hey, talk about it at home, on the road, going to bed, getting up. And then he says something that's kind of specific to their culture. It seems a little bit foreign and odd to us at first. He says, tie them. He goes, these things, these laws, these commands, these ways of faith. He says, tie them to your hands and wear them on your forehead as reminders. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, even today, and some of you have seen this, even today, there are some Jewish people who you will actually see who have written down scriptures, written down commands or rules that they feel like they're called to live by. And they've put them in little boxes and tied them to their foreheads or tied them around their wrists as a way of reminding themselves and giving themselves something to meditate on and focus on. They would literally put things on their doorposts, put things on their gates as physical reminders, so that they would continually put their attention on those things and so that their kids would see them as well. Now, you and I aren't quite that different today, and you're probably not tying things to your forehead, or you probably don't have a gate at your house. If so, I'd like to come to your house, You probably don't. But you actually display things in your house that are most important to you and that reflect your greatest values. You put artwork on the fridge, you put pictures on the wall, you put inspiring quotes up at times. And Moses is like, hey, make sure that the thing that is the greatest source of inspiration for your family is visible to your family, right? For Moses, Moses' faith conversations weren't just a thing to have when you have time for them. For Moses, listen, faith conversations were meant to be integrated into every single moment and every single component of our day. Many of us think about it like we have to have this big, massive moment with our kids. Like you got to go home and prepare a sermon or be a theologian, right? And have church at your house. But for Moses, he's like, no. Don't add this to your schedule. Integrate this into every part of your schedule, which for us as parents is a reminder of this, right? That every interaction with our kids is an opportunity to make a spiritual impression on them. Now, I don't want to just talk about this morning. I want to actually give you or allow you the opportunity to develop a vision for yourself and for your family with this. And it's not my vision, quite honestly. It's the vision that Moses gives us. But I actually want to give you a tour of your house this morning just for a few minutes, just to kind of walk through that space. And you can pretend that it's all cleaned up, there's no clutter, the dishes have been done, the bathroom counters have been wiped down, okay? So this is not a scary tour of your house. This is the tour of your house the day that you walked in maybe, right? But I want to actually give you a tour of your house this morning and give you the chance to think about the interactions as a parent that you have in each and every space that you walk into. We're going to talk about the 5 spaces that Moses lays out for us. The first one, he says, hey, talk about these things. Talk about spiritual things when you're at home. When you're done running errands. When you're unloading the groceries. When you're sitting there doing homework with your kids. So many opportunities that come up for conversations. Conversations about how we spend our money, where we put our resources. Conversations just not about where we spent it, but also where we gave it. Conversations about what God might be teaching your kid through the things that they're describing to you, through the experiences that they're having. Conversations about what God might be doing or trying to unveil or show to them. Conversations about what God might be doing in your life. I've learned as a parent, it's natural for me to ask my kid about their day. My 6-year-old doesn't spend a lot of time asking me about my day, but yet often I find myself now starting to realize that if I will actually open my day up to her, I actually get the chance to show her where I experienced God, or where God was revealing things to me or prompting me throughout my day? What's it look like for you when you're at home? I was talking to somebody a while ago who talked about how when they went to shop for houses, like they were buying a house, they intentionally bought a house with small bedrooms. The reason they bought a house with small bedrooms is because they didn't want their kids to be drawn towards their bedrooms. They wanted the family space to be the space that people were drawn to. What's your day? What's your rhythm look like? What's your space feel like? Is it the kind of space that pushes everybody into their own spaces, or a kind of place that actually draws people together for more and more interactions and conversations? What's it look like for you to integrate faith at home? The second thing Moses tells us is on the road. I was thinking about this week. Every time that I get in the car with my kid, every time that you get in the car with your kid, is a transition for me and a transition for your kid, right? You wear a lot of hats as a parent in your life, right? Employee, employer, follower, leader, coach, dad, mom, so many hats that you wear. Your kid probably wears almost as many hats as you do throughout the day. Student, son or daughter, athlete, musician. And every time that you get in the car with your kid, they're actually transitioning roles in their day from one thing to the next thing. It's an opportunity to talk about what God might actually want to do in them and through them in the next role or with the next hat that they're about to take on in their life and in their day. Now, so often that we kind of load the car, and I was thinking about this week, we jump in the car, and we get in the car, and it almost feels like, it's not going to make sense at first, but almost feels like a Delta plane for a second. Okay? So my kid, every time that we go to the airport, she asks me, Dad, are we flying on Sun Country or Delta? Okay? Like she's only seen two ends of the spectrum, the Sun Country or Delta. And she, if I say Delta, which is rare, if I say Delta, she is so excited. Do you know why she's so excited for Delta? Because they have the little TVs on the back of the seat. And she loves those little TVs because it's got shows she's never seen before. It's got games she's never played before. And she just gets so excited for that. All right? I was thinking about this week. So often, my car and your car can feel a little bit like a Delta jet, right? Like the pilot gets in and the pilot closes the door to the front cabin. And he's in the same plane, but he's in a completely different space. And the people in the back are all sitting there doing this. How many opportunities might you be missing with your kid every time you get in the car? Moses, remember, he goes on. He says, talk about these things not just at home, not just on the road. He says, talk about these things when you go to bed. Now, every parent knows this. Bedtime is the time, like the one time of the day where most kids actually start to talk. And I found this, the reason I think it is, right, is because it's like my kid has two choices. Talk to me, go to sleep. Talk to me, go to sleep. Talk to me sounds a whole lot better to her at bedtime. I was talking to a friend this week, actually was reaching out to a friend. I was texting them about something, and they responded back like an hour later, and they said, hey, sorry, I'm slow getting back to you. They said I was putting my kids to bed. And my first thought was, your kids are teenagers. Do they not know how to put themselves to bed? And then I thought a little bit more about it, and I realized, whoa, this isn't about brushing their teeth and getting their jammies on. This is about taking the time for conversations that matter most at the end of the day when they're primed to talk and have conversations. What's it look like for you when your kids go to bed? Moses goes on and says, when they get up, right? What's your morning look like with them? Is there space to remind them of who they are, who created them, and who they were created to be? What's the last thing your kids hear from you on the way out of the door when they're headed to their day? And lastly, Moses says, hey, he talks about our spaces. For them, doorposts and gates. For us, walls and mirrors and everything else. If a stranger walked into your house, would they know what was most important to you? When your kids walk into your house, can they see what's most important to you? You display what you care about. And everything that's on your walls tells your kids what you care about. Now, here's the thing. Some of us grew up in spaces with parents that thought this way. Most of us didn't. So let me just ask you for a second. Can you imagine if your parents had thought like this? Can you imagine if your parents had been intentional about every interaction and conversation that they had with you? What would your faith have looked like at 18? What decisions would you have made or would you have not made in your 20s? What directions would you have taken or not taken if they had been this intentional with your faith? Don't you want that for your kids? Isn't that what you desire for them? Now, I'll say this. Some of us, quite honestly, we have conversations like this, and we think about this, and we talk about this, and some of you, you're like, hey, I want my kids to have a faith like that. I want my kids to experience a family like that, but the reality is, you kind of would say back, you go, hey, I don't know what to say to them in conversations like this. And the reason you don't know what to say to them in conversations like this is because you're not sure what you believe about all of this. You're not sure what your relationship with God looks like or is supposed to look like. You're not sure what you think about him. We talk about the person of Jesus, and you're not sure what you believe in that space. And it's hard to pass on something that you don't fully have yourself. So let me ask you this. Would you step into Starting Point? Talked about this a few minutes ago. Starting Point is an environment that we created specifically for people to engage with their questions of faith and start to get traction with their faith journey. And this isn't the kind of space that you're going to walk in and walk out 8 weeks later having everything figured out, because the reality is none of us has everything figured out. But it's the kind of space that's going to give you traction in your own faith journey and help you get handlebars about what you believe about God, about Jesus, and about faith, and put you in a position as a parent to have the conversations that you desire to have with your kids for the sake, not just of you, but for the sake of your kids. Would you sign up for Starting Point? Now, others of us in this conversation, you've barely been paying attention in this conversation because it feels massively relevant to you. You actually look at this conversation, you go, hey, this doesn't really apply to me because I don't have kids at home. Your kids are long gone. You don't have kids. Maybe you don't ever want to have kids, whatever space you're in. You're like, hey, I don't even have kids at home. I don't even, this doesn't apply to me. Can I just be honest with you as a dad? Parents need your help. Raising kids of faith has never been easy, but I'm convinced that right now it's harder than ever. And parents sitting in this room, if they were honest and if they had the opportunity to, they would look at you and they would almost plead with you to step in and partner with them and help their kids discover faith. So on behalf of them as a parent, I just look at you and say, hey, will you partner with parents to raise their kids in faith? Because parents can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. And so if you don't have kids at home, I want to real quick just introduce you to about 60 kids who would love the chance to meet you. 60 kids who every Sunday spend an hour in one of our classes discovering the ways of Jesus and learning what it looks like to live a life of faith. And they don't discover it through a video. They won't discover it through a memory verse. They won't discover it through a craft that they make. They'll discover it through a person who cared enough to show up and sit down with them and engage them and introduce them to the person who made the greatest impact on themselves in a way that can make the greatest impact on them as well. Now, some of us, you look at this, you're like, hey, look, I get it. I think that's important. Kids are great. But you just go, look, I don't like kids. And I understand that because quite honestly, do you know what I said before I had a kid? I said, I don't like kids. One of the, I can only think of one time that I was truly mad at my wife. Like genuinely, truly, you have whatever, but truly mad at my wife. It was the day that she put a 3-day-old child, baby, in my arms and forced me to hold it. I was sitting on the couch at my friend's house. They had just had a baby. We went to visit them. She takes the baby. I'm sitting down, and she just lays it in my lap. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm going to break this child. You know what I mean? Like I was deathly afraid of children. About a year later, we moved to a new community, and we jumped and got involved in a new church. And the pastor there was actually kicking off this initiative at a elementary school nearby. And he asked for people to sign up to go and be like a mentor to kids at this elementary school. And for some reason or other, I don't know if it was because I was just new and I was just trying to like score points or something, but for some reason or another, I just felt moved or led and said, yeah, sure. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do here, but sure, sign me up. I remember the first day I went to that elementary school to have lunch with Isaac. It's funny, I was warned about Isaac ahead of time. He's like, hey, I gave you the toughest kid, I'm sorry, Like, great. I remember the first time driving to that elementary school, I was so nervous. I might have been less nervous going to pick Emily up for our first date, Like, I was so nervous driving to this elementary school. I was like, I don't know anything about kids. I don't know how to talk to kids. I don't know what to do. I met Isaac. I sat down with him at lunch. I was so awkward. I was so unsure. I was so afraid. About a week later, I went and picked him up at his house to go out for ice cream. I think we went to Chick-fil-A. I was so nervous. I was so awkward. I was so afraid. But over the course of those few years that I got to spend with Isaac, man, Isaac opened up something in my heart that I didn't know was there. About 6 months ago, he sends me a picture from his graduation. I'm like, dude, you graduated high school? Like, you're that old? You know what I mean? He just won a state championship. I was like, were state champion in esports? I didn't even know that was a thing. My man won video games in the state of Georgia. You know what I mean? I'm like, let's go, dude. He's like, man, I'm enlisted in the Navy. Dude, that kid's life, totally different. And I was one voice of hundreds of voices that shaped his life, but I was so proud of that kid. Hear me on this. You might say that you don't like kids, but I promise you, if you will open up a little bit of your time and a little bit of your heart for a few kids, not all 60 of them, about 7 of them, they are going to awake things in you that you didn't know existed. Pieces of you are going to come out that you never knew were there. You're going to laugh in ways that you haven't laughed in years. You're going to shed tears in ways that you didn't even know you'd shed tears. You're going to feel things you didn't even know you had the capacity to feel because you allowed yourself to open up a piece of your life to a group of kids who need someone like you to mold, to shape their faith. That's you. Would you at least take one day in shadow and co-kids our experience in the back and just see what it could look like to be a part of that? Now, lastly, some of us, parents specifically, some of us as parents, probably most of us as parents, we have conversations like this, and you track with this, and you're like, man, yeah, that's great. I want to have more conversations with my kids. I want to be more intentional with my kids. But if you're honest with yourself, you're going to get home, and in a few days, you're going to realize something. What you're going to say is this. You're going to say, there aren't enough interactions in the day with my kids. I mean, by the time you're done finishing with school, sports, homework, rehearsals, band, gymnastics, just getting them to everywhere and anywhere and then getting them home. You find yourself longing for more moments to spend with them. Do you know the average American family gets 54 minutes of quality time together a day? Less than an hour. That's the average. There's a whole lot of families with even less. Quite honestly, I'm convinced the pace that we move at times is one of the greatest things that keeps us from being able to pass on to our kids the things that matter most to us. Which is why we're going to talk about that next Sunday. I hope you'll be here for that conversation. Let me pray for us before we go. Jesus, I thank you for the ways that you have positioned so many people in this room to make a difference in the life of the next generation. God, I thank you for the opportunities that you've given us to leave an impression on them. Would you help us be the kind of people who choose to make the most of everything that we have? God, for the parent in the room who finds himself wondering if they have what their kid needs. God, would you give them the courage to step into conversations that maybe they haven't had before? To bring up topics or ask questions that maybe they haven't engaged with in a while? God, would you show up in those moments as they seek to further the heart of their kid towards you? God, for the person in the room this morning who doesn't have kids but has a heart for kids, or maybe doesn't even have a heart but just recognizes the need to make a difference and the next generation of our world. God, would you show them the way forward, help them to know where and how to say yes to making an impression? The kids of our church, the kids of our schools, kids of every space that we walk into, will we be the kind of people who leave a mark on them for the better? God, we can't wait to see what you do through us. We love you. We thank you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.